Never before has a machine evolved so quickly as the computer has over the past 25 years, and we've changed with it. Computers crept into our lives in the harmless guise of a typewriter. But who is the master and who the servant? The spirits that we called won't let us go. Quite apart from their nostalgic appearance, older computers also surprise us when we look back at their facts and figures. A PC with a 10 megabyte hard drive cost the equivalent of €5,000 in 1984. The price per megabyte was €500. A typical modern computer with a 500 gigabyte hard drive would have cost the same as a Boeing 747, more than €200 million. The computer took several quantum leaps forward in terms of size and cost reduction and an increase in capacity. A floppy disk of the first generation stored 400 kilobytes, the next generation already 1.44 megabytes. A 64 gigabyte USB stick we now wear around our necks like reading glasses would in 1984 have had the dimensions of the Millennium Tower. Today, everything is happening a bit too quickly. The last quarter of a century has become an age of fast answers without questions. A range of functions seem to have developed a life independent of computers and their peripherals. Mobile phones and organizers have become small, high-performance offshoots of big computers. The electronics of the first lunar module can't quite match what every washing machine can do 40 years later. For the novel of a dystopia that George Orwell wrote in 1949, he chose the title 1984. But the oft-quoted Orwell year 1984 is in fact the year computer technology for everyone took off.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, one resolve, one cause.
Apple armed itself with a bellicose video message for its first computer for the people. George Orwell's dark vision of a totalitarian state hasn't come true. Instead, computers started invading our homes in 1984.
We'll introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
It was also the birth of the first generation of computers from Microsoft. Bill Gates dominated the front covers and proudly presented his first storage medium, which looked like it was made of cardboard. These days, not even a snapshot taken by a mobile phone would fit on it, let alone an entire music video.
It's only a movie.
It's not funny.
In Austria, the first private television broadcasters went on air and we learned a new word, zapping. But the box of electronics was stupid. Interaction was a skill that had to be learned.
We've been spared the vision of 1984 with Big Brother and his famous moustache who watches everything. But what we have done is create a surveillance state. Of course, behind a technologically very pretty facade, behind a kind of fun society, but nonetheless.
Spaßgesellschaft haben wir natürlich einen ganz beinharten Kontrollstaat geschaffen.
Computers everywhere, around the clock, total networking and a high degree of surveillance. What are we doing with the computers and what are they doing with us? There are two famous examples of computers trying to be human. There is HAL from Stanley Kubrick's science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey. It wanted to seize power from its human masters. And the reality? In airline traffic, where human brainpower coupled with computer-controlled onboard electronics sometimes causes misunderstandings. But more about that later. On the other hand, Deep Blue presented the sporty, playful variety. Here, a chess computer competes against the world's best chess players. 256 computer chips against 10 billion human brain cells.
The moment I make mistake with this machine, the moment I make mistake, I will be out of the game. There is no mercy and there is no hope for the gracious gesture for the computer side. It will just go and kill you.
Kasparov, the human being, may be able to recall 50,000 moves from memory and eliminate all those that aren't suitable. Deep Blue, the computer, stubbornly goes through every option, even the absurd ones, all the way to the end. This addresses the central question of whether computers are intelligent. The answer is a clear maybe. Artificial intelligence, yes. It's a bit like comparing apples and oranges. Deep Blue was fed with data for 6 years to analyse 100 billion move sequences in 3 minutes.
These
computers do a vast amount of work for us. They make things a lot easier. But at the same time, they require us to take care of them, look after them, nurture them, feed them codes, do software updates, that kind of thing. Computers are very time-consuming, and we don't notice that we could be spending this time doing socially important things. We're missing out on social development.
On average, we spend half an hour a day on the digital administration of our everyday lives. We pick things up on the internet and play it somewhere else. 3 computers per user are normal. Of course, it embodies the all-in-one idea, one gadget that can do it all, but nobody knows whether we're yet ready for less hardware. Originally, computers were for geeks, but for most of us, they were a thing of the future. The singer and composer Christina Zerbrugg uses computers in her work.
My first encounter with computers wasn't composing, it was the typewriter. I typed up my lyrics and wrote stories, and then these typewriters came out where you had a crawler screen at the top where you could save the whole page. That was the absolutely greatest thing ever.
The development is moving from the electric to the electronic typewriter. In the future, the microchip will start to dominate the office too.
In parallel with the developments in the computer world, the typewriter fought for survival. It was given a memory, and its one-line display was soon moved to a small screen, but it was never really part of it. Atari and Commodore are legendary style icons, seen as the technological beginning of many developments in the communications industry. A textbook people's computer. The storage medium of this forerunner generation to the plug-and-play home computer was the very analog audio cassette. Atari started later with the floppy disk. Digital photography has brought about a revolution in memory capacity. In 1984, the entire contents of a computer could be transferred from one computer to another on a 1.44 megabyte floppy. Today, 250 gigabytes of memory is the lowest acceptable, and transfer speeds have become thousands of times faster because nobody is willing to wait for anything any longer than it takes to boil an egg. Computer performance can be compared to a city and its public transport network. The memory of a hard drive is represented by the buildings. They contain the data, or here, the people. The random access memory corresponds to the places where the people perform activities, the school or the workplace, for example. The modes of transport correspond to data packages that do the transfers. The clock signal corresponds to the speed of the working steps. The more megahertz, the faster the work. The circuit diagrams and displays for public traffic networks have a disconcerting similarity.
Computers are neither calculators nor typewriters. They're rather an extension to our privacy, to our most intimate thoughts and actions.
WWW. These 3 letters, or rather this letter typed 3 times, has shrunk the physical world and greatly expanded the computer world. At around the same time as digital photography arrived, the internet became available for all. Since 1993, we've been in the World Wide Web, downloading things onto our desktops. We download more often than we take trips to the fridge. As a result, the virtual world has become an economic reality. Almost everything is available online. The expression of the era is to Google, and the system behind it gives us a comparison in which Homo sapiens doesn't look so bad.
The brain has around 100 billion nerve cells and 100 trillion synapses, and it works like a huge parallel computer. But the brain requires less than 100 watts. If you imagine all of Google's computers put together, the computing power is equivalent to that of 20 to 25 people.
Von etwa 20 bis 25 Menschen.
I don't use computers for computing, I use them for writing and for archiving.
The trained typesetter Heinz Rudolph Unger is an author who managed to make do without a computer for half his life.
I'm a very sloppy person, I have to admit, and that's why I introduced some oversized structures to create order.
Heinz Rudolph Unger anticipates the principle of how computers function in his workspace.
These workspaces are all individual building sites, but that's also because I work in many different literary media. These areas are very separate, but all of them require 100% attention. That's why I have different workspaces for different projects.
Some thoughts aren't very compatible with computers.
I write with everything I have available, and I have very different emotions with all of those. I have a detached emotion when I'm sitting in front of the screen following a text compared to when I'm scrolling down ideas in the middle of the night, because I've just dreamed of them. Boy meets girl, for example. Of course, the writing itself reveals how captivated I was by an idea, and that's not there with computers. This emotion is lost. The emotion then must come across through the words themselves. The truly revolutionary thing about computers was this new way of working so that you can constantly keep working on your documents.
Diese neue Art des Arbeitens, so dass man sein Textmaterial, die
In the past, you had to laboriously blank it out between the 6th and 7th versions of a project.
Zum Beispiel mühselige Klebeumbrüche machen müssen zwischen der 6. und der 7. Fassung.
But there is the danger that texts become too smooth, polished like a tombstone.
Dass Texte dann zu glatt werden, dass geschliffen wird wie
That's why it's a good idea to write by hand and do sketches and leave mistakes in and work around them.
Ist es sinnvoll, wenn man außerhalb des Computers auch mit der Hand schreibt, dass man Skizzen macht, dass man
Outside of the computer, I have a day planner where I write in every day.
Außerhalb des Computers habe ich auch ein Tagesjournal.
The individual projects develop in the form of hieroglyphs.
Projekte kommen in Form von Hieroglyphen praktisch.
I don't write the whole title. I have an icon for every project. Artists need all of their senses to create something.
The computer and the internet have also taken hold of the visual arts. At the monothematic Computer Biennale of 1995, the sculpture by the media artist Richard Krischer was slowed down via the internet on its way through the Austrian pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Every user influenced the object in its pre-programmed motion sequence by logging into the internet address of TS4. The incoming data streams were shown on the monitor. The visual arts now make use of the new media, seemingly without transmission losses. Installations aren't set up, they take place. The music has been given a further keyboard with computers, which has developed from an experiment into a system.
Computer.
It was a total play instinct. There are these sounds that acoustic instruments just don't have. Now we have the subject of computers. We got the first computer sounds. Computers make sounds. What kind of sounds are they? The sounds I like are the paper sorter, for example. Here we have a robot. There are sounds that are music. A sound is music. I always have to make it colourful. I don't like grey. I often think about which sound will get what colour. It has a lot to do with imagination for me.
Do computers even promote creativity? The formerly dumb metal boxes are now experiencing a magical cell division. Computers keep producing new little computers, such as iPods. It is the grandchild of the legendary Walkman. It heralded the 21st century and has given us a new word. Broadcast became podcast. Its scrolling sound alone is an acoustic work of art. Now even compact discs are getting a bit long in the tooth, and DVDs are on their way out. One big reason is that music now comes from the internet, is downloaded onto our computers, and is administered and carried around from there too. We are all collectors and DJs.
It's wrong to believe that I can take a computer and the computer then makes the music. If you want to compose a string piece, you have to compose a string piece. The computer doesn't do that on its own. One big difference for me is the accordion and the voice, of course. These are breathing instruments. The computer breath is more of a humming and buzzing.
Computer architecture is a structured landscape. The motherboard appears like Mother Earth to her data children. Imaginative people are invited to build an entire city from the term computer architecture. The software is constantly increasing. The hardware is getting smaller and smaller, and the possibilities seem endless. Although we brought this process about, we are also increasingly having problems with its effects.
Mit Hilfe der Computer können wir
With the help of computers, we can collect and process large quantities of data. This makes us believe that we can automatically solve problems with large quantities of data. Every time we face a problem, we collect more data, which means that we need more computer technology, more storage capacity, more programs to evaluate them.
Natürlich, dass wir dann wieder mehr Computertechnik brauchen, mehr Datenspeicher brauchen, mehr Programme, das
It's a fact that we can't solve anything that way.
Sache ist aber natürlich, dass wir damit nichts lösen können, sondern
we're just increasing the size of our haystack instead of finding the needle, which is wisdom or knowledge.
Also die Weisheit oder das Wissen, das wir suchen, besser zu finden.
Amongst the first information carriers were the Inca knotted strings that allowed their makers to remember something only they knew about. This individual memory is something a computer will never achieve. Today, the knowledge of others is a new problem area because hiding in the worldwide networks are countless duplicates and mistakes. The paperless society has not just got rid of the printer, but also the dictionary with lasting effects.
Ich brauche natürlich eine Strategie, wie
Of course, I need a strategy of how to produce knowledge from information. That means I need superordinate concepts, which really should be taught to people. People should learn how to do research, how to test information for plausibility, how to compare information, and how to extract knowledge from it. If I find 10,000 items on a certain subject on the internet, 9,000 of them will be complete nonsense. Filtering out the 1,000 that are correct requires a superordinate strategy, and far too few people learn that.
Das lernen wir viel zu wenig.
Humanity has produced more than 32 million books to date, as well as an estimated 750 million articles. Compare that to 100 billion websites in just 16 years. Both analogue and digital knowledge is being archived. Many thousands of bibliophile treasures are slumbering in the archives of the Austrian National Library. Using special scanners for delicate and precious materials, they can be conserved for the long term. This also creates a way to make information accessible to everyone in a fast and unbureaucratic manner. Proponents value this availability of knowledge. Critics call it a seduction into paperlessness that could lead to nothing. Transition affects analogue and digital equally. Anyone questioning the durability of DVDs these days will justifiably point out the mortality of earlier data storage devices such as magnetic tape. The information in the World Wide Web was also quite short-lived in the first few years. After around 70 days, a lot of content was overwritten again. Now the Austrian National Library has become the place where information from the internet is stored. Historical analogue knowledge is being digitalised, and right next door, the transient medium that is the internet is getting an archive. The state also collects data from its citizens, who all have their own computers and are also collecting data. They all leave their marks.
Kaum einem Menschen ist bewusst,
Hardly anyone is aware how often they behave in a way that is formally suspect, which means that formally it corresponds to that of a drug runner, a mafia boss, or a terrorist. If we start recording these data traces and analysing them according to these formal criteria, we create a prevention society or an alibi society.
Kommen wir in eine Präventivgesellschaft, in diese Alibi-Gesellschaft hinein.
More and more, we'll face the problem of having to justify behaviour that we really can't explain because it's so normal that we may not even be able to remember the circumstances where we behaved that way. If we create a society built of glass walls in which everyone has to toe a particular line, when we're all inconspicuous and we all conform, then we'll lose the ability to react to new challenges in the future.
Leitlinie bewegen, in der alle nur noch unauffällig sind, in der sich alle nur mehr noch angepasst verhalten, dann werden wir irgendwann die Fähigkeit.
Then this society will collapse, like so many other societies that grew old and weren't capable of achieving anything new.
Alt geworden sind und nicht mehr zu neuen fähig wurden.
We have a love-hate relationship to our sat-nav systems that can't listen, which is typical of how we feel about computers. This new remote control for people demonstrates that while achievements take time, they quickly make us dependent. Captain Computer is the third man in the cockpit, and it almost seems as if he wanted to play the first fiddle. It has reduced the manual controls to a narrow strip between the pilot and co-pilot. But while our home computers are always up to date and constantly being updated, what about the onboard electronics in the cockpit? Surprisingly, they're not.
The computer technology in aeroplanes is older. That has several reasons. Firstly, these instruments have to be certified to be failure-proof. One large software manufacturer, for example, hasn't managed that yet. Secondly, these computers mustn't produce too much heat.
Here in the flight simulator, we're being warned about dangers. What we're worried about are the digital contradictions.
The more you automate, the more you hand over to computers, the more you become unaware of what the machine is doing. A typical example is the incident in Warsaw. There are always two modes in the aeroplane, one for flight and one for on the ground. Different functions are enabled. You can't have reverse thrust in the air, for example. At the time, human intervention wasn't possible. The plane was firmly of the opinion that it was flying and wouldn't deploy the spoilers. That's been changed. You can now override the computer. You can reverse thrust and deploy the spoilers. The computers always point out errors, and they also assess their importance. In 2004, there was an incident with a freight plane in Baghdad. The plane was shot at, an engine caught fire, and the entire hydraulic controls were lost. The plane could only be controlled with the engines. A computer detected the engine fire, and if you let it, it would automatically shut that engine down. The plane would have crashed. We need people who can see the big picture and who have experience and who can trust their gut feelings to do things differently from what the computer logic is saying.
A digital organ failure is unlikely but possible.
At every level we can say this much automation is acceptable for these flying conditions, but we have to be able to reduce that all the way to manual flying without computer influence.
If he were a computer, would he trust the likes of himself?
A plane has several computers. If you have 3 computers, 2 are always monitoring the other, and as soon as 2 have the same signal, the third is switched off as having erroneous information. What we need is the ability to take over control at all times, because it can happen that 2 computers are both wrong at the same time, and the third, the one that is switched off, is the right one.
Could organised computers turn against people in a user-unfriendly way?
Computers that really do work independently could get the idea that people are troublemakers in this wonderful system and need to be eliminated.
But we don't have to be worried. Without consciousness, computers don't have a memory or a soul, and they definitely don't have a will, so they won't harm us either. It's unfortunate that we even spend rainy Monday mornings while we're still half asleep doing our work, such as programming computers.
Material seems to me to be safer even so.
At the end of the story, we've come back to the beginning. The sound of the milk frother in our espresso machine is just like the one our old coffee maker made when it simply boiled water without any pressure. Mobile phones were already born in the filter coffee age. They break down our entire day into tiny fragments because we immediately react to every little change, altering our plans. Mobile phones, for you and me, have developed their own cultural history in just a quarter of a century. It's not just with televisions that the antenna has a nostalgic feel. We would like to know whether the next generation will have to call out an archaeologist when they find something like this. An old cassette that got stuck in a car's cassette player and was simply chucked away in the street. Only the good old fax has been allowed to age with dignity. It just won't die out. This hybrid between telephone and printer gives us necessities such as the ability to send original signatures and contracts. It also gives us one of the most absurd sounds, close to our pain barrier. When people closed Windows, they never used to think about clicking away icons on desktops. They thought about cold air coming in from the outside. Talking of which, our computers can catch cold too. The health of our computers has been under threat from viruses since their inception, and the mountains of rubbish don't stop at the world of computers either. Another new word: spam. The biggest danger lies in the expendable. Our computers are also players, and we are with them. We're never closer to our computers and more distant from our environment than we are when we're face to face with the interface. And if the parent generation gives up in frustration when it comes to the countless terms for plug-in connections, they can be consoled by the fact that Bluetooth was only the beginning of wirelessness. Plugs are being phased out. The new nonsense has just as little method as did the bad habits of the past, but it's spreading faster. Never before have people been doing this much research, and who would have thought in 1984 that we'd all send an average of 12 letters a day? Electronic mail can sometimes be faster than the sender's intentions, and the same is true for Facebook, where you can be friends with the rest of the world electronically. In the end, it's like a magazine subscription. We want to get rid of it, but we don't know how.
Deleting can also be pleasurable.